The Miami night was alive with heat, neon, and bass that rattled the chest. Ocean spray from nearby beaches mingled with the scent of perfume, cologne, and alcohol that soaked the crowded club. Reese, Viper Callahan, moved through it all like she owned none of it yet controlled everything. Her eyes scanned constantly, the way predators did before the kill, not aggressive, not flashy, just aware. She wore a sleek black dress that hugged her frame, paired with combat boots she kept under the table for later. Her friends laughed, dancing on the edge of chaos, unaware that the woman they called Reese was more lethal than any man in the club, maybe more than anyone in the world in that moment. They didn't know that her day job, her real life, involved leading DEVGRU's deadliest SEAL unit on missions classified so top secret that most Americans didn't even know such a unit existed. They certainly didn't know she had personally neutralized threats that could have toppled governments. Tonight, though, she was just another figure in the pulsating crowd. Her attention shifted to a group near the bar. One man stood out immediately, broad-chested, jaw tight with arrogance, walking as if the entire world had to bow to him. The Marine was loud, crude, and ridiculously confident. He had a swagger that screamed of someone who never faced a real fight outside a gym. His friends cheered him on as he approached, fist raised. "You look like someone I could knock out in one hit," he shouted over the music, a smirk plastered across his face. The crowd noticed him, drawn to the impending confrontation like moths to a flame. But Reese's eyes didn't widen, didn't flinch. They narrowed. Every muscle in her body tensed instinctively, a silent prelude to action. Before he could register it, he swung. The punch came fast and wild, a testosterone-fueled strike with all the arrogance of a man convinced he couldn't fail. But Reese was faster, a heartbeat faster. She pivoted, her hand catching his wrist mid-swing, twisting it sharply behind his back. Pain exploded along his arm and his face contorted. "Do you even know who you're messing with?" she whispered, close to his ear, her voice ice under velvet. Shock froze him. The room fell silent around them, not because the music stopped, it didn't, but because every instinct screamed danger. Reese wasn't just reacting, she was commanding. Every movement precise, every decision calculated. He struggled, but her grip didn't waver. The crowd circled instinctively, curiosity and tension thick in the air. Some cheered the boldness, some gasped, but nobody dared intervene. The Marine's bravado faltered. For the first time in his life, he was confronted by someone whose authority didn't come from size, training, or rank. It came from sheer lethal competence. Reese released him gently, stepping back. The Marine stumbled, clutching his wrist, muttering apologies he didn't fully understand. His friends pulled him away, whispering about what just happened, their faces pale. Reese exhaled quietly, the tension in her shoulders easing, though not completely. Something about tonight didn't feel right. Beyond the club lights, beyond the music and laughter, she could sense a deeper threat, invisible but palpable. Her training had taught her to trust those instincts. She wasn't just a Marine officer anymore. She was a SEAL, a leader, someone who survived countless firefights, ambushes, and missions that made headlines for everyone else, but were never talked about publicly. And instincts like hers didn't lie. The music thumped again, louder this time, shaking the wooden floorboards. Reese returned to her friends, laughing lightly, though her eyes never stopped scanning. Her phone buzzed briefly, a signal from her team. Routine intel update. Nothing urgent, nothing alarming, yet the hair on the back of her neck remained on edge. Somewhere beyond the mirrored walls and flashing lights, shadows moved. Observers, unseen, watching. Miami was crawling with low-level criminals, cartel scouts, and occasional opportunists. Most of them didn't even realize that the woman they were tracking was capable of turning the tide of an entire firefight alone. Reese sipped her drink, savoring the sweetness but tasting the tension beneath it. She allowed herself a smile, small and knowing, almost playful. It wasn't about ego, it was about awareness. Every detail mattered. The angles of exit doors, the placement of bodies, the faint vibration of a speaker under the club floor, the whisper of a vent. Her team had drilled this into her. She had drilled it into herself. so that even in social chaos, threats became clear, simple, manageable. The Marine lingered nearby, his ego wounded and pride bleeding. He tried to bluff his way back into dominance, puffing out his chest. "You got lucky," he muttered, voice low, almost trembling though he tried to hide it. Reese tilted her head slightly, studying him. His posture, his movements, the subtle hesitation, all told her exactly what she needed to know. He was dangerous only to himself, a threat to no one else. And yet, he served a purpose tonight. A contrast. A reminder of the untrained arrogance most people carried into the world without a clue. She moved through the crowd, brushing against bodies, heading toward the balcony that overlooked the beach. Moonlight spilled through open windows, casting sharp lines across her face. She paused, listening. A faint, irregular movement in the shadows caught her trained eye. She tensed ever so slightly. This was no ordinary night. The Marine incident was trivial, a footnote in the story of her evening, but it had been a distraction, and distractions could kill. A subtle twitch near the service corridor made her blood run cold. Someone was watching, waiting for an opportunity. Reese's lips pressed into a thin line. She felt the adrenaline spike, the familiar rush of combat awareness coursing through her veins. Her friends, oblivious, continued laughing and dancing, but Reese's focus had shifted. One hand hovered near her concealed earpiece, ready to communicate, coordinate, react. Then she caught the faintest motion at the far end of the balcony, a figure darting out of the shadows quickly, almost too quickly. She froze, instinct screaming. That's when she realized, tonight wouldn't end with a drink and laughter. Tonight, someone had followed her here, and they didn't intend to leave alive if she discovered them. The Marine, oblivious to everything except his bruised pride, watched from afar. He had no idea that the woman he had mocked and tried to strike commanded more power than he could imagine, and that within moments, he might witness a glimpse of the lethal world he had foolishly stumbled into. The bass thumped harder, flashing lights strobing across the dance floor. Reese inhaled slowly, eyes narrowing as the shadows shifted again. Every instinct in her body screamed, "Prepare, they're coming, and they won't wait for anyone to notice." She smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly to herself. The night had only just begun. Reese Viper Callahan leaned against the balcony railing, letting the faint Miami breeze wash over her, but her mind wasn't on the ocean waves or the moonlight dancing on the water. Her thoughts were elsewhere, always elsewhere. She could still feel the Marine's fist slicing through the air mere minutes ago, the sting of raw arrogance and ignorance brushing against her awareness. A careless, reckless man, lucky maybe, that he had only provoked her curiosity, not her wrath. Her friends chattered behind her, unaware of the tension tightening her jaw, but Reese's eyes were fixed on the shadows moving along the far edge of the club. They weren't random. Her instincts screamed at her. These were professionals, or at least amateurs trained well enough to know how to avoid detection. Someone had been following her, someone who knew what they were looking for. And that someone wasn't here for a brawl or an ego boost. The bass from the club thumped like a heartbeat in her chest. She exhaled slowly, recalling the last time her instincts had screamed at her and she had ignored them. Afghanistan, a village under cover of darkness. Friendly fire nearly striking her team because one operator had dismissed the signs. She hadn't ignored it this time. Not ever again. She scanned every exit, every crowd cluster, every corner where a threat could hide. Reese's phone buzzed discreetly. A soft alert from her team. Routine intel confirming the Marine was harmless, a civilian Marine on leave, but her instincts screamed otherwise. She didn't need confirmation from anyone. Her past missions had trained her eyes to see what others couldn't. The subtle shift of weight, the flicker of a shadow, the slight hesitation that betrayed intent. And there it was again, movement near the service corridor. Quick, silent, deliberate. Someone had been watching her since she entered the club, tracking her patterns, waiting for her to be distracted. The Marine had been just that, a distraction, a tool they had no idea they had leveraged. Reese's mind flashed to past operations. Hostage rescues where a single wrong step could cost lives, ambushes deep in hostile territory, missions where the wrong decision would mean national catastrophe. And she had survived them all because she observed, because she predicted, because she acted when the world was blind. The club, with its flashing lights and drunken laughter, felt suddenly like a battlefield. She straightened, drawing herself up, her posture commanding, radiating authority without saying a word. Her friends noticed the shift. One whispered, "You okay? You look tense." Reese smiled faintly. "I'm fine, just aware." The words sounded casual, but in them was the weight of unspoken experience, the kind that only someone who had stared death in the face daily could carry. From her peripheral vision, she spotted the first real clue of intent. A man slipping between shadows near the bar's rear exit. He moved deliberately, scanning the crowd, pausing only when someone came too close. Reese could feel it in her gut, the subtle pulse of danger, an invisible thread connecting her to the observer. She pressed a hand lightly to her earpiece. Eyes open, eyes only, no engagement yet. Her voice was soft but firm. Seconds later, subtle replies came back, silent confirmations from her team stationed covertly around Miami. DVGRU wasn't just a name on paper, they were everywhere, ready to react before anyone even realized there was a threat. The Marine, still clutching his wrist, wandered near the VIP area, curiosity finally eclipsing his ego. "What the hell is she?" he muttered under his breath. He didn't know the half of it. He didn't know the missions she'd led, the enemies she had faced, the lives she had saved and the ones she had lost. To him, she was just a woman who had countered his punch. But to anyone trained in real danger, she was a storm cloaked in calm, a predator disguised in human form. As he gawked, Reese's attention shifted back to the shadows. The man near the rear exit had just signaled, a subtle hand movement, almost imperceptible. Reese's pulse quickened. They weren't just observers. They were orchestrators, professionals, mercenaries, likely ex-military, trained in infiltration and ambush. And they had been tracking her for a reason she couldn't yet see. The club throbbed around her, the music and laughter now a background soundtrack to a scene of potential carnage. Reese felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the same tightening she had felt before storms of bullets, before the chaos of combat, before lives hung on decisions she alone could make. She adjusted her stance, rolling her shoulders, keeping her movements fluid but controlled. Her friends moved closer, sensing her tension, yet oblivious to the full reality. "It's just a club, Reese. Relax," one joked, but Reese only smiled faintly, a shadow of steel behind her eyes. She couldn't relax. Not yet. Danger didn't announce itself with a trumpet or neon sign. It hid in the cracks, in the corners, in the faintest motion at the edge of perception. And she had been trained to see it. Then came the first sound that made her truly alert. The faint click of a gun being chambered. Almost imperceptible, but to Reese it was deafening. Her hand went instinctively to her concealed holster, though she didn't draw. Not yet. Timing was everything. Control was everything. One wrong move and the club would erupt in panic. One wrong move and she could expose her identity, endangering not just herself but the lives of every team member scattered around the city. Her eyes narrowed as she traced the source. A man in black, partially concealed behind a column, glancing toward the balcony. He was calculating, deliberate, and trained. He was a threat, and he had no idea who he was about to face. Reese's heartbeat slowed, focus sharpening into crystalline clarity. She could neutralize him in a second, silently, efficiently, but tonight wasn't about elimination. It was about observation, strategy, understanding the scope of the threat. The Marine, still gawking, leaned closer to a friend and whispered, I think she's dangerous." His voice was shaky. Reese could see the dawning realization in his posture, the sudden shift from arrogance to awe, the exact moment a man comprehends he is in over his head. Reese moved subtly, inching toward the stairwell that led to the service corridors. Each step was calculated, fluid, almost invisible to the untrained eye. She needed to assess, to understand. Her team would converge at the right moment, but she had to know the enemy before revealing her hand. The shadows shifted again. More movement. Someone was coordinating. Reese's breath was steady, her mind a machine of calculation. One misstep here, one misread signal, and the night could spiral into violence. And while she didn't seek violence, she never feared it either. Her thoughts flicked briefly to her team, men and women who trusted her with life-and-death decisions, who had followed her through the most impossible operations imaginable. She owed them clarity tonight. She owed them precision. And most importantly, she owed herself awareness. Then a chill ran down her spine, a primal warning she had learned to trust above all else. Reese froze, eyes scanning the crowd, the bar, the balcony, the corridors. Someone was out there, waiting, watching. They knew she was here. They knew she commanded something far beyond their understanding. And yet they were moving forward, confident, reckless, or desperate enough to act. The Marine, now sitting against the bar, whispered to no one in particular, "I don't think I've ever seen someone like her." His words were drowned by the music, but Reese heard them perfectly. A small, almost amused smile touched her lips. He had no idea at all. Her gaze shifted back to the shadows, heart steady, mind razor sharp. She touched her earpiece again, eyes open. They've begun their approach. Stay silent, observe, no engagement yet. Her voice was calm, but the authority behind it was palpable. The night had changed. What began as a routine club outing, a simple distraction from the endless pressures of leadership, had transformed into a battlefield of wits, precision, and survival. Reese felt the familiar rush, the clarity of control, the deadly beauty of preparation. And she knew the real danger was just beginning. The club's lights flashed and beat in time with the bass, but to Reese, the rhythm of the music no longer mattered. Her attention was entirely on the shadows shifting along the perimeter of the VIP section. The intruders, professionals, trained, patient, were testing her awareness. Every slight motion, every pause, every glance through the crowd told her more than 1,000 words ever could. The Marine, still nursing his wounded ego, staggered near the bar, oblivious to the lethal awareness radiating from her every movement. He leaned toward his friend, whispering, I don't get it. Who is she?" His voice carried awe, fear, and that fragile tinge of respect that arrogance can never anticipate. He had no idea he had stumbled into the orbit of someone whose entire life had been sculpted for moments like this. Reese's mind worked with surgical precision, cataloging every detail. The angle of the rear exit, the way the bartender's eye flicked toward the shadows, the subtle hand signals passing between the men in black. They were ex-military, possibly mercenaries, trained in surveillance and infiltration, but they had underestimated her. That mistake would be costly for them. One of the men, taller, broad-shouldered, moved toward the bar, pretending to be part of the crowd. His pace was deliberate, controlled, calculated to avoid detection. Reese noticed the slight shift in the man's posture, the way he subtly braced his shoulders for action. That split-second movement was all she needed. She began to plan her countermeasures in real time, her mind racing faster than the pounding music. The Marine, entirely unaware of the brewing storm, raised his voice. "Hey, lady, you really think you can?" But he didn't finish. Reese's gaze flicked toward him briefly, a warning unspoken yet unmistakable. A flick of her eyes, a tilt of her head, and he froze, realizing instinctively that this was not a game, and he was dangerously out of his depth. Reese didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every motion was a signal, every blink a message. Her hand brushed lightly across her earpiece, sending subtle commands to her team stationed covertly throughout Miami. They had been monitoring her movements, ready for any situation, but tonight's chaos required discretion and precision. The intruders had now split into two groups. One group lingered near the VIP area, scanning patrons, measuring distances, and checking exits. The other group shadowed her movements, trying to predict her path, but Reese anticipated them effortlessly. She adjusted her posture, moved closer to the stairs leading to the service corridor, and allowed the crowd to obscure her presence. Her heart rate remained steady. The thrill was there, but fear was absent. She had faced far worse. ambushes in foreign countries, firefights in desert towns, and missions that blurred the line between life and death. This was different, a civilian environment filled with innocence, a space where any mistake could cost lives. That made every decision sharper, every move more precise. The Marine stumbled closer to the VIP section, curiosity now overriding caution. "I don't know, I think she's military or something," he muttered under his breath. Reese caught the words, smiled faintly, almost amused, and then turned her attention back to the intruders. The taller man reached into his jacket, and the faint metallic glint of a weapon caught Reese's eye. Her body tensed, ready for action. But she didn't move, not yet. Timing was everything. A wrong action here and the night could spiral into chaos. She calculated the distance, the trajectory, the response time. Every muscle was coiled, a spring of lethal precision. She noticed another subtle detail. A server approaching the group, unaware of the danger, her tray shaking slightly as she walked. Reese made a decision instantly. With the lightest touch of her hand, she guided the server behind a protective column, shielding her from the potential threat without drawing attention. The woman gave her a fleeting look of gratitude before moving on, blissfully unaware of the danger she had narrowly avoided. The intruders exchanged signals, now aware that someone had noticed them. Reese's pulse quickened, not with fear but with anticipation. She could see the pattern forming, their strategy, their entry points, their weaknesses. It was a mental chess game, and she had always been several moves ahead. The Marine, still gawking, whispered to himself, This isn't normal." He watched as she moved fluidly through the crowd, eyes darting, mind calculating, every motion controlled yet explosive in potential. He could sense the danger but not comprehend it. He had walked into a world far beyond his understanding, and the reality of it began to terrify him. Reese's gaze returned to the taller man near the bar. His hand now rested lightly on the weapon, ready to strike. She took a small step, closing the distance silently, the crowd unknowingly serving as cover. Every motion was deliberate, designed to maintain the illusion of normalcy while positioning herself for maximum tactical advantage. Then it happened. A sudden movement from the second group of intruders, a shove toward the bar, a distraction meant to scatter the crowd. Drinks flew and screams erupted as people stumbled. The Marine froze, realizing for the first time that this was real danger, not bravado or ego. Panic spread around the club, chaos beginning to ripple outward. Reese acted instantly. She intercepted the taller man, disarming him with a single, precise twist of the wrist, redirecting his momentum harmlessly into the bar. Glass shattered, people screamed, and the Marine's jaw dropped. He finally understood. This was no ordinary woman. This was someone trained to neutralize threats faster than anyone around her could even process. Her movements were fluid, almost artistic, yet lethal in potential. She swept the bar area, securing civilians and ensuring no one was caught in the crossfire. Every action calculated, every step deliberate. She gave subtle hand signals to her team through her earpiece, coordinating responses that the crowd couldn't see but that would soon decide the outcome. The Marine, now pressed against the wall, whispered, barely audible, I think I just almost died." His words were lost amid the chaos, but Reese didn't need to hear them. She had already noted his posture, his reactions, his shock, all part of the battlefield awareness she processed in moments. The intruders hesitated. Their plan had assumed control, surprise, and confusion. They had neither. Reese had disrupted everything with a single measured approach, and now the night had turned against them. Then came the first real shot, a warning fired into the air, bullets ricocheting off the bar, shattering glass and sending sparks flying. Panic erupted fully. People screamed and pushed toward exits. Reese didn't flinch. She moved through the chaos like a shadow, intercepting threats, disarming one intruder while redirecting another into a safe containment zone. Her team, now in position throughout the building, began to converge silently, each member acting on her precise instructions. The Marine, still frozen in awe, realized he was witnessing the impossible. He had thought he understood strength, courage, combat, but nothing could have prepared him for this. Reese, Viper Callahan, was in her element, commanding chaos, orchestrating safety, and neutralizing danger all at once. The taller man, now fully aware of her capabilities, tried to flee, but Reese anticipated him instantly. With a movement so fast it was almost invisible, she intercepted him, neutralizing the threat without a single shot. The crowd barely noticed her, yet those who did glimpsed something extraordinary, a predator cloaked in calm, controlling the storm around her. And in that moment, the Marine finally understood. He had underestimated her. He had thought he could intimidate, challenge, or confront. But he had no idea. He had walked straight into the path of someone who commanded not just attention, but lethal authority, someone who led America's most dangerous warriors, a woman who had stared death in the face and walked away every single time. Reese glanced toward the balcony, eyes scanning for other threats. Her instincts told her the night wasn't over, the chaos was only the beginning. Someone had orchestrated this intrusion, and she could feel their eyes still watching, still waiting. The Marine's foolishness had been just the opening act. Her lips curved into a faint smile. She was ready. The music thumped mercilessly, shaking the floorboards of the Miami Beach Club, but Reese Viper Callahan barely noticed it. Her senses had tuned out the irrelevant noise, the laughter, the neon flash, the rhythmic bass, and sharpened to the subtle cues of danger. The shift of shadows, the scuff of shoes against tile, the faint metallic glint that betrayed hidden weapons. The intruders had revealed themselves. Now fully armed and moving with deadly intent, they weren't testing her awareness anymore. They were making their play. Reese's heart remained calm, her body poised like a panther ready to strike. One misstep here could cost lives. The crowd was dense, chaotic, oblivious to the deadly game unfolding around them. Civilians, oblivious, pressed against tables, spilling drinks in their attempts to flee. A security guard, a young man new to the job, stepped forward trying to assert control. "Hey, step back. There's no fighting in here." His voice barely carried over the pounding music. The intruders' leader, a man broad-shouldered with eyes like knives, smirked. Without hesitation, he drew a firearm and fired a single warning shot into the ceiling. Sparks showered down. Panic erupted immediately. People screamed, trampling over one another toward the exits. Glass shattered. Chairs toppled. Bottles shattered. Reese moved instantly, stepping behind a structural pillar, her eyes scanning every threat simultaneously. This was a controlled chaos, but only in her mind. Every muscle, every synapse, every instinct from years of combat fired at once. She was calculating trajectories, exit points, and engagement sequences in a fraction of a second. Her earpiece whispered soft confirmations. Her team, strategically dispersed around Miami as part of routine covert operations, had already begun converging. She was the conductor of a deadly orchestra that nobody in the club could perceive. The Marine, still pressed against the bar, wide-eyed and trembling, whispered to himself, "Oh God, I had no idea." Reese ignored him. Civilians were at risk, and she had to neutralize the threat without panic spreading further. She caught the subtle signal of one intruder moving toward the VIP area, a man attempting to flank. With a swift, silent step, she intercepted him, redirecting him into a support column. The man crashed against it with a grunt, temporarily stunned. A second intruder lunged toward a server carrying a tray of drinks. Without drawing attention to herself, Reese guided the server safely to a corner behind a reinforced pillar. The woman froze, looking at Reese in confusion and awe, then vanished from sight. The club was in chaos, but Reese's movements were surgical. Every action minimized risk to civilians, every motion anticipated the enemy's next move. Her team had begun taking positions silently, one on the upper balcony, another near the service corridor, and yet another blending into the crowd. The intruders thought they were unpredictable. They were not. Then a sudden, sharp movement. One of the men aimed a pistol at a fleeing civilian. Reese moved like a shadow. Within seconds, the firearm was ripped from his hands, the man thrown to the ground in a precise, controlled maneuver that left him stunned and disoriented. Civilians screamed, some unaware of how close death had brushed past them, while others glanced in awe at the quiet authority of the woman orchestrating the defense. The Marine finally understood the reality of the situation. This wasn't a bar fight. This wasn't a prank or a show of bravado. This was a deadly battlefield, and Reese was the commander. He had tried to assert dominance with a reckless punch earlier, and now he realized the horrifying magnitude of his mistake. He was witnessing firsthand a glimpse into a world he hadn't even imagined. The precision, calm, and lethal skill of someone trained to control life and death situations with absolute authority. Reese pressed her palm lightly to her earpiece. "Team, engage. Keep it silent. Contain the perimeter. No civilian casualties." Her words were barely audible to anyone except those on the other end of the line, but the precision in her tone conveyed unyielding command. The intruders regrouped, realizing the situation had escalated beyond their control. They had expected chaos to work in their favor, but they hadn't accounted for someone like Reese, someone who could see several steps ahead, anticipating every move before it happened. Their leader barked a command, but it was too late. Reese pivoted, intercepting another intruder heading toward the stairs. With a swift motion, she disarmed him and redirected his momentum, sending him sprawling without harm. Every move she made was silent, fluid, and deadly. The crowd, oblivious to her skill, only registered glimpses of a shadow moving with unnatural precision. The Marine, now crouched against the wall, whispered in awe, I think I don't even know." Reese didn't answer. There was no time for explanations. Another intruder attempted to pull a firearm from inside his jacket. Reese's reflexes were instantaneous. With a flick of her wrist, she knocked the weapon away, simultaneously sweeping the man to the ground. A table collapsed under the force, spilling drinks and shattering glasses. Patrons screamed, but no one was physically harmed. Her earpiece crackled again. Team members confirmed their positions. The perimeter was secure, civilians were safe, and intruders were now fully exposed. Reese allowed herself a brief glance at the Marine. His expression had shifted from arrogance to shock to awe and finally to fear. It was a fleeting victory, though minor in the grand scheme. He had learned the hard way. Underestimating her was dangerous, and tonight it could have been deadly. Suddenly, the intruder's leader tried to take control of the situation, pointing his weapon directly at Reese from across the room. Time slowed. Every muscle in her body tensed, but she didn't panic. She calculated angles, trajectory, and engagement distance. Civilians were in the line of fire. The slightest mistake could result in disaster. With calm precision, she signaled her team. Two members moved silently, flanking the man without drawing attention. Within seconds, he was disarmed, incapacitated without a single shot being fired. The remaining intruders hesitated, their confidence collapsing. The orchestrated chaos had unraveled faster than they could comprehend. The Marine, finally comprehending the full gravity of what he had witnessed, muttered under his breath, She's unreal." Reese allowed herself a faint, almost imperceptible smile, but her eyes remained cold, scanning the crowd for any further threats. The chaos of the club was under control, but she knew that tonight's danger had only just revealed itself. Someone had orchestrated this attack. Someone who knew she was here. Someone who had the audacity to test her and would likely return. The bass continued to pound, the neon lights flickered, and patrons slowly began to regain composure, though whispers of awe and fear rippled through the crowd. Reese adjusted her stance, eyes narrowing as she considered the bigger picture. The intruders were neutralized for now, but the real threat, the unseen orchestrator, was still out there, watching, waiting, planning the next move. She touched her earpiece lightly. "Stay alert. They're not done. This was just a probe." Her team's responses were immediate, precise. The network of lethal operatives under her command was ready. They trusted her instinct, her skill, her judgment. And Reese, as always, was already thinking 3 steps ahead, planning the next move in a deadly game where every second could mean life or death. The Marine finally turned away, his earlier arrogance completely shattered. He had seen the truth. A woman who could command chaos, protect innocence, and neutralize threats with a precision he could barely comprehend. And yet, Reese's gaze returned to the shadows outside the club. She felt it in her bones. The night was far from over. Someone out there still intended to challenge her. And when they did, Reese Viper Callahan would be ready. The club was a symphony of chaos now. Screams cut through the music, shattered glass glittered under the strobe lights, and bodies moved frantically in every direction. But Reese Viper Callahan didn't see panic. She saw variables, threats, civilians. Her instincts, honed over years of combat missions and lethal operations, carved a clear path through the madness. Every step, every glance, every decision was precise, a deadly dance only she could perform. Her team was in position. Silent signals had been sent, flanking points secured, escape routes monitored, intruders neutralized. Yet Reese knew the danger wasn't over. These men had been probes sent to test her skills. Whoever had orchestrated this had bigger plans, and Reese would be ready. From the corner of her eye, she spotted the tallest intruder attempting a second strike. He lunged toward the bar, a weapon tucked under his jacket, hopping for a distraction to regain the upper hand. Reese moved like lightning. In one fluid motion, she intercepted him, twisting his arm, redirecting his momentum into a structural column. The man's body collided with a deafening crash. Patrons screamed, but none were physically harmed. The Marine, still pressed against the wall near the bar, whispered in awe. I think she just saved everyone." His voice trembled. He had underestimated her completely, and now he saw firsthand what true skill looked like. Calm, controlled, lethal precision. Reese's eyes never left the remaining intruders. They were regrouping near the service corridor, trying to gain control, but every movement they made was anticipated. She signaled to her team via subtle hand gestures. Within seconds, 2 operatives moved silently through the crowd, converging on the intruders' flanks. The chaos became a controlled counterattack. Reese neutralized a man aiming a firearm with a precise strike to the wrist, sending the gun spinning harmlessly across the floor. Another intruder lunged at her from behind a table. She twisted, using his momentum to throw him into a stack of overturned chairs. The sound of splintering wood and crashing glass filled the air, but again, no civilians were harmed. The Marine's jaw dropped. He whispered under his breath, I think she's a ghost." He had no idea of her past, the missions she had led, the lives she had saved, the enemies she had eliminated. All he knew was that she moved like she had death in her pocket and would use it without hesitation if necessary. Outside the VIP section, a server froze, tray trembling, too afraid to move. Reese's eyes caught her. With a subtle motion, she guided her toward cover behind a reinforced column, shielding her from danger. The woman shot her a fleeting glance of gratitude, then melted into safety. Reese's movements were poetry in motion, fluid, deliberate, deadly. She didn't fire a single shot yet. She didn't need to. Her presence, her command, her precision created a perimeter of safety in the middle of chaos. Every intruder's step was anticipated, every plan countered before it could unfold. The taller intruder tried to retreat toward the balcony exit, seeking a vantage point. Reese moved faster. A single step, a subtle pivot, and he found himself facing the floor as she redirected his balance. He scrambled to regain control, only to realize he was completely outmatched. Her team had now taken silent positions around the building, one at the rear exit, another at the balcony, one blending seamlessly into the crowd. Reese communicated with them in microseconds, a language of glances, gestures, and subtle shifts that the untrained eye would never notice. A sudden warning shot rang out, echoing off the walls. Patrons screamed and scattered further, tripping over each other. Reese moved without hesitation. She intercepted the man who had fired, spinning him to the floor and disarming him in a single, fluid motion. Another intruder lunged at her from the corner, but she had already anticipated it, redirecting him into a fallen pillar, neutralizing him without lethal force. The Marine watched in disbelief. She's unreal," he muttered. He had thought strength was brute force, that dominance was in fists and posturing. But Reese's power was subtle, invisible, lethal, and controlled. She didn't need to fight, she just needed to command, and everything around her bent to her will. Through the chaos, Reese's mind was calculating the bigger picture. These intruders were organized, but they were amateurs compared to the unseen orchestrator waiting in the shadows. She knew this was a setup, a probe. Someone was testing her defenses, her skill, her reaction time, and they would come again. Her hand brushed lightly across her earpiece. "Team, confirm perimeter," she whispered. Her voice was calm, but the authority behind it was ironclad. Seconds later, confirmations came back. Rear exit secured, balcony secured, intruders contained. The intruders, realizing their advantage had evaporated, attempted to regroup. Reese's eyes narrowed. One slight motion and she was on them again. She moved like a shadow, striking with precision, neutralizing threats before they could react. Glass shattered under a well-placed sweep. Bodies stumbled harmlessly into protective cover. Chaos managed without harm. The Marine finally understood. This wasn't a fight. This was an exhibition of skill, control, and lethal precision. Reese Viper Callahan wasn't just a soldier. She was a predator, a commander, and a protector, all in one. And he had been foolish enough to challenge her ego earlier in the night. Then came the final piece of chaos. One intruder attempted to flee toward the VIP section, likely trying to regroup with an ally. Reese anticipated the movement instantly. A sharp, silent pivot, a sweep of her leg, and he crashed into the floor. The sound was deafening, but the precision left him stunned and unable to continue. The music continued, oblivious to the deadly ballet unfolding. Patrons screamed, but Reese's calm presence in the storm ensured that no civilian was seriously harmed. She had turned the tide, contained the chaos, and controlled the battlefield with nothing but observation, instinct, and precision. Her earpiece crackled softly. Team members reported, intruders contained, no fatalities, civilians unharmed. Reese allowed herself a brief, almost imperceptible smile. Mission accomplished for now. But as she scanned the crowd, a chill ran down her spine. Her eyes flicked toward the balcony. A shadow moved, deliberate, watching, waiting. The intruders had been probes. The real threat was still out there. The Marine, still pressed against the wall, whispered to himself, She commands everything." His voice trembled with awe. He finally understood the terrifying truth. The woman he had tried to hit was not just dangerous. She was lethal. She was in control, and she would not tolerate mistakes. Reese exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. The chaos was over, but the war had just begun. The night had revealed her skill, her command, her precision, and it had revealed one undeniable truth. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone was testing her, and they were still out there, waiting for the next move. The Marine would never forget this night. Neither would the intruders. And Reese, she was already planning the next step, knowing that the shadows outside the club held dangers far greater than the chaos she had just tamed. The night was far from over, and Reese Viper Callahan was ready. The club was quieting now, but the echo of chaos still lingered. Broken glass glimmered under the strobe lights. Overturned chairs formed jagged barricades, and patrons whispered in disbelief, glancing nervously at the woman who had orchestrated their survival. Reese Viper Callahan moved like a shadow among them, her boots silent on the sticky floor. Every step was deliberate, measured. Every glance swept the room, recalibrating her awareness. The Marine, still huddled near the bar, watched her with wide eyes. He had thought he understood danger when he tried to throw that reckless punch earlier. Now he knew the terrifying truth. He had been playing in the orbit of someone far beyond his comprehension. Reese hadn't just defended herself. She had neutralized multiple armed intruders, coordinated a perimeter, and protected civilians, all without firing a single shot. But Reese's mind was elsewhere. The intruders had been nothing more than probes. Whoever had sent them was still out there, observing, waiting for the right moment to strike. The subtle movements in the shadows, the faint glances of someone lingering near the exit told her everything. This was no random attack. This was a calculated test, and tests were preludes to war. Her hand brushed lightly against her earpiece. "Team, status report," she murmured. Replies came almost immediately. Her operatives had secured the perimeter outside the club, were watching exits, and had discreetly detained the intruders for further interrogation. No civilians were harmed, and the threat had been contained, but the orchestrator remained unidentified. Reese's gaze shifted toward the balcony. A fleeting shadow caught her eye. Subtle, deliberate, careful, not random. Someone was still observing, calculating, probably communicating with unseen allies. This person wasn't here to engage directly yet. They were waiting for an opening, gauging her skill, her speed, her awareness. She allowed herself a brief moment to assess the damage inside the club. Patrons were being guided toward exits, their panic subsiding but replaced by awe and fear. Staff were gathering shattered glass, attempting to restore some semblance of order. Reese moved through them silently, unnoticed by all but the Marine, who now trailed her at a cautious distance. You really are," he started, voice trembling, but Reese didn't respond. Words were unnecessary. She was already planning the next move. The orchestrator's presence was subtle but unmistakable. Reese felt it in the tiniest of movements, the faintest shifts in shadows. They were testing her patience, assessing her reactions, and gauging the limits of her skill. That meant one thing: she had to be proactive. She couldn't wait for them to act first. Reese moved toward the service corridor, every step measured, her eyes scanning for any sign of surveillance or ambush. Her team had already positioned themselves at key points: exits, stairwells, alleyways. They trusted her instinct, her judgment, and she trusted them to execute flawlessly. Every detail mattered. A single misstep could give the orchestrator the advantage they sought. The Marine, finally gathering the courage to speak, whispered, You're not just a soldier, I don't even know what to call you." Reese glanced at him briefly. Her expression was calm but sharp, warning him silently not to interfere. "Keep low," she murmured. "Stay out of sight. Watch and learn." He nodded, his earlier arrogance replaced by a mix of awe and fear. He had never been in the presence of someone like her, someone whose life had been forged in the crucible of combat, someone who commanded respect without demanding it, someone whose skill made even the most trained adversaries hesitate. Reese pressed forward, moving to the rear exit. The shadows shifted again. A faint silhouette, partially concealed by the alleyway beyond, caught her eye. She froze. The presence was deliberate, calculated. Not a random passerby, not a curious bystander. Someone was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. She allowed herself a small smile, almost imperceptible. This was exactly what she had anticipated. The orchestrator had underestimated her patience, her strategic mind, and her ability to turn any environment into a battlefield. Her earpiece crackled softly. Target movement confirmed. No engagement yet. Reese responded with a subtle nod, signaling her team to maintain surveillance and containment. She moved into the alley, her boots silent on the wet pavement. The faint scent of salt from the nearby ocean mixed with the musky odor of the city at night. Every shadow, every flicker of movement was a potential threat. She moved deliberately, her body coiled like a spring, ready to strike at a moment's notice. A car door slammed in the distance. Reese froze. Her instincts screamed that this was not a coincidence. Someone was coordinating from multiple points, using the chaos inside the club as a distraction. She scanned the perimeter, nodding every potential vantage point, every possible escape route. Then a faint signal, a reflection from a window across the street, a glint, subtle, deliberate. Someone was observing, probably armed, calculating their approach. Reese's hand moved lightly to the concealed holster at her hip, not to draw but to remind herself of her options. Every movement, every decision had to be precise. The Marine trailed behind, whispering, I can't believe you see all of this all at once." Reese didn't answer. Her focus was absolute. The orchestrator was testing her, probing for weaknesses, looking for an opening, but she had none. She was always one step ahead. Every potential threat had been anticipated, every escape route secured, every civilian accounted for. Suddenly, a faint sound, a click, almost imperceptible but distinct. Reese froze, her instincts screaming. Someone was preparing a device, a weapon, a trap. She moved with fluid precision, scanning the surrounding buildings, the shadows, the alleyways. Her team confirmed via earpiece. Device detected. Stand by for containment. Reese allowed herself a controlled exhale. This was it. The orchestrator revealing themselves in the first overt move beyond the probes. She adjusted her stance, ready to neutralize the threat without exposing civilians or her team. The Marine whispered, almost inaudibly, I think we're about to see something unreal." Reese's eyes narrowed. She could feel the orchestrator's presence, their strategy unfolding in real time. But she was ready. Every training exercise, every mission, every life-and-death encounter had prepared her for this moment. She had studied, planned, and executed countless operations where the odds were against her, and she had survived. Always. Her mind raced, calculating engagement points, neutralization tactics, and safe corridors for civilians. She moved silently, every step precise, every motion deliberate. The orchestrator would make their move soon, and when they did, Reese would be ready. The Marine, still pressed behind her, whispered, I don't think anyone's ever seen anyone like you." Reese allowed herself a faint smile. Stay low, observe, learn. The alley was quiet, but the tension was palpable. Every shadow could hide a weapon. Every flicker of movement could signal an attack. Reese's instincts were heightened, her body ready. She knew that the orchestrator's next move would reveal their true intentions. And she would be ready. The alley was silent, but Reese, Viper, Callahan could feel the tension hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Every sense was alert, the faint rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, even the subtle shift of the night breeze against the buildings. The orchestrator had revealed themselves through their movements, their precision, and their audacity. This wasn't a random attack. It was a calculated strike, and now it was personal. The Marine, still trailing cautiously behind, whispered, This is unreal. I've never seen anyone move like you." Reese didn't respond. Words weren't needed. Every step she took, every glance, every micro-adjustment of her posture spoke volumes. She was a predator in a controlled environment, and the orchestrator, whoever they were, was about to realize the cost of underestimating her. Ahead in the dim light of the alley, a figure shifted. Subtle, deliberate, calculated. Reese's eyes narrowed. The man, tall, muscular, and exuding lethal confidence, was armed but confident that his plan had the upper hand. He had underestimated her. Everyone did. Reese moved silently, using the shadows and debris to obscure her approach. Every motion was deliberate, controlled, and precise. She analyzed his stance, his grip on the weapon, the subtle tension in his muscles. He was trained, but he was about to learn the hard truth. Skill alone was not enough when faced with someone who could anticipate every move. "Step out," she said, her voice low, controlled, carrying the weight of authority that demanded obedience. "You've lost the advantage." The man's lips curled into a smirk. "Viper," he said, the name carrying recognition, respect, and perhaps a hint of fear. "I've been waiting for this." Reese's mind raced. He was not acting alone. He was the tip of the spear, the visible face of a deeper, more dangerous network. She needed to end this quickly, decisively, without collateral damage. Civilians were nearby. Her team was positioned, but the orchestrator was skilled, the kind of enemy who thrived in chaos. The Marine, crouched behind a dumpster, whispered, I think he knows who you are." Reese didn't flinch. She had faced men like him countless times. She had led teams against enemies who had every advantage imaginable, and she had always emerged victorious. This would be no different. The man shifted, taking a step forward. "I've seen your operations, your team, the way you move, but you're alone here." Reese's eyes flicked to the shadows behind him. Not alone. He had no idea the network she commanded was already converging silently, ready to contain him if necessary. But she preferred to handle this herself. This was her confrontation, her test, and she intended to control it fully. Suddenly the man lunged, weapon raised. Reese reacted with a fluid motion, twisting his wrist, redirecting his momentum, and sending him sprawling into a pile of crates. The weapon clattered harmlessly across the ground. He scrambled to regain his stance, eyes narrowing in frustration. "You're fast," he admitted, his voice tight, "but not fast enough." Reese advanced calmly, her steps measured, closing the distance without giving him room to react. "I'm always fast enough," she said. He reached for a concealed knife, a flash of steel in the dim alley, but Reese anticipated the move before it even began. With a precise pivot, she intercepted, knocking the knife aside and delivering a controlled strike to his shoulder, sending him stumbling back. The movement was smooth, practiced, and devastating in its efficiency. The Marine's jaw dropped. She's unreal," he muttered, voice trembling. He had thought he understood combat. He hadn't, not even close. The man regained his footing, eyes flashing with determination. "You're good," he said, breathing heavily, "but this isn't over. They sent me for a reason." Reese's gaze hardened. "Then tell me who sent you." He smirked, almost mocking, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. "You don't know the half of it," he said, "and if I tell you, you'll understand the danger." Reese didn't move. Her presence alone conveyed control. "Then start talking," she said, "or we end this now." The man hesitated, weighing his options. He was trained, lethal, and confident, but he had underestimated her. That was his mistake. Suddenly, a faint sound, a whisper of movement, drew Reese's attention. She pivoted slightly, eyes scanning the alley. Another figure appeared, partially obscured by the shadows, watching, assessing. The orchestrator had been testing her all along, sending probes, gauging reactions, and now revealing themselves in stages. The man in front of her cursed under his breath. "It's not just me," he admitted. "They're everywhere, watching, waiting, and you've already been seen." Reese's mind raced. She calculated escape routes, engagement sequences, and potential collateral risks. Her team was in position, but she preferred to handle this confrontation directly. She was Viper. She didn't wait for backup. She controlled the battlefield. The Marine whispered, voice barely audible, I think this is the real test." Reese nodded slightly. "Stay low, watch and learn." The man lunged again, faster this time. Reese reacted instantly, using his momentum against him, flipping him over her shoulder and sending him crashing into the wall. The impact was loud, echoing through the alley but precise, designed to incapacitate, not kill. He struggled to rise, gritting his teeth. "Impressive," he muttered, "but you can't stop what's coming." Reese's eyes narrowed. "Try me." The orchestrator, now partially revealed in the shadows, finally stepped forward. Tall, imposing, with a presence that radiated danger and intelligence, they moved with deliberate precision. "Viper," the voice said, calm but carrying authority. "You've done well tonight, but this is only the beginning." Reese's body tensed. She could feel the stakes escalating. This wasn't a simple confrontation. This was a test of her skill, her strategy, and her resolve. The orchestrator had resources, manpower, and intelligence, but Reese had something far more dangerous, experience, instinct, and control. "You've been watching," she said, voice low and controlled. "Testing me, sending your men, I see you now." The orchestrator smirked. "And now you understand. You're good, but you're not invincible." Reese's hand brushed lightly against her earpiece. Her team, positioned across the city, awaited her command. She didn't need them yet. This was her fight, her choice. She had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. She would do it again. The man lunged once more, and Reese moved like lightning, intercepting his strike, redirecting his momentum, and sending him sprawling into a stack of crates. The orchestrator's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. "You're fast," they said, voice tight, "but can you handle this?" Before Reese could respond, a sudden flurry of movement from the shadows, more operatives attempting to flank her. But she was ready. With precise, fluid motions, she neutralized each threat, redirecting them harmlessly into obstacles while maintaining perfect awareness of the orchestrator in front of her. The Marine whispered, barely audible, I can't believe what I'm seeing." Reese allowed herself a faint smile. "Watch closely, learn." The orchestrator stepped back, reassessing. They realized finally that Reese Viper Callahan was more than just lethal skill. She was strategy, precision, and control, all in one. And anyone who underestimated her would pay the price. The Marine finally understood. He had thought he knew danger. He hadn't. He had thought he understood combat. He didn't. Reese was in a league entirely her own, and tonight he had witnessed it firsthand. The orchestrator's eyes narrowed. "This isn't over," they said, voice low and dangerous. "We'll meet again, and next time the stakes will be higher." Reese's gaze hardened. "I'll be ready," she said, "always." And with that, the orchestrator vanished into the shadows, leaving Reese standing alone in the alley, her team converging silently around her. The Marine, still pressed against the wall, finally spoke, voice trembling with awe. You're unreal." Reese allowed herself a brief, almost imperceptible smile, but her eyes were already scanning, already calculating, already preparing. This confrontation was over for now, but the war was far from finished. The night had revealed the shadow, the orchestrator, and Reese Viper Callahan was ready for whatever came next. The Miami night was thick with tension, the air still carrying the remnants of chaos from the club. Broken glass glittered under the neon lights, reflecting the faint glow of street lamps. Reese Viper Callahan moved through the shadows, silent and deliberate, her senses heightened to every detail. She had neutralized the immediate threats, contained the chaos, and confronted the orchestrator. But she knew the fight was far from over. The Marine, still trailing cautiously, whispered, They really came for you, didn't they?" Reese didn't answer. Words were unnecessary. The orchestrator had revealed themselves, tested her skill, and vanished into the night, but their presence was still palpable. Reese could feel it in the faintest movements of the city, in the glint of a window across the street, in the subtle shift of shadows around her. Someone powerful, precise, and relentless was orchestrating events, and they had underestimated one thing: her patience. Her earpiece crackled softly. "Viper team is in position, all exits monitored, intruders contained, no civilians harmed." She allowed herself a brief nod. Everything was in place. Tonight she would take the offensive. She didn't wait for threats to strike. She hunted. Reese moved with purpose, tracing the orchestrator's path through the city. Using surveillance footage, witness reports, and the subtle clues left behind, she pieced together their escape route. Every step, every movement had been calculated, and now she would turn that precision against them. The Marine, finally finding the courage to speak, asked in a hushed voice, How do you do it? How do you see everything?" Reese's eyes didn't waver from the shadows ahead. "Experience," she said simply, "and instinct. You learn to see patterns, anticipate movements, control outcomes." The orchestrator's network was vast, but they had made a critical error, underestimating her ability to adapt, to predict, to dominate. Reese had neutralized their initial probe with surgical precision. Now, she would dismantle the orchestrator's plan entirely. She reached an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the perfect staging ground for their operation. The Marine crouched behind a pillar, his eyes wide with awe and fear. He had never witnessed combat like this, controlled, precise, and utterly lethal in efficiency. Inside the warehouse, shadows shifted. The orchestrator's operatives were there, armed, confident, expecting to catch her in a trap. But Reese had already predicted their positioning. Every angle, every vantage point, every potential escape route had been accounted for. "Team," she whispered into her earpiece. "Engage, contain. No fatalities unless necessary." Like ghosts, her operatives moved into position. Silent, precise, and lethal, they converged on the intruders without a single alarm triggered. The orchestrator's men realized too late that they were surrounded, their confidence collapsing under Reese's controlled assault. A sudden flare illuminated the center of the warehouse. The orchestrator stepped forward, tall, imposing, a predator in their own right. "You've proven yourself tonight," they said, voice carrying authority and challenge. "But this isn't over." Reese advanced, every step deliberate. "It ends tonight," she replied. Her presence was commanding, her confidence unshakable. No more games, no more probes. The orchestrator's smirk faltered. They had faced skilled adversaries before, but never someone like Reese. She was more than skill. She was strategy, precision, and control embodied. And tonight, they would learn the consequences of underestimating her. The battle began. Operatives clashed silently, movements precise and lethal yet controlled. Reese moved through the chaos with fluid efficiency, neutralizing threats before they could react. Each strike, each maneuver was calculated to incapacitate without unnecessary harm. She was a storm contained within steel nerves, her team extensions of her will. The Marine watched in disbelief. He had thought he understood danger, had thought he knew what it meant to be in a fight. Now, he realized he had been completely naive. Reese wasn't just a warrior. She was a force of nature, orchestrating outcomes with precision that bordered on supernatural. The orchestrator tried to regroup, signaling their operatives to counterattack. But Reese had anticipated this. With a subtle gesture, she directed her team, flanking positions and choke points secured. Within moments, the orchestrator's men were disarmed, incapacitated, and contained. Panic flickered in their eyes as they realized they were outmatched not by numbers, but by skill, foresight, and command. The orchestrator, realizing their plan had collapsed, moved forward for a direct confrontation. "You're impressive," they said, eyes narrowing. "But even you have limits." Reese's gaze hardened. Limits are for those who don't prepare, who don't adapt, who don't control the battlefield. The final confrontation was a tense ballet. Each movement was precise, deliberate, controlled. Reese struck with measured force, deflecting attacks, neutralizing threats, and maintaining perfect awareness of her surroundings. The orchestrator countered with skill and agility, but Reese had already studied them, predicted their tactics, and set the stage for their inevitable defeat. A final, decisive move. Reese disarmed the orchestrator, sending their weapon clattering across the concrete floor. With a swift, fluid motion, she secured them, forcing them to the ground. The warehouse was silent, broken only by the shallow breaths of the defeated and the faint hum of the night outside. Reese looked down at the orchestrator, her eyes cold but controlled. "This ends tonight. Your network, your probes, your plans, all neutralized. You underestimated me. That was your mistake." The orchestrator's expression was a mixture of respect and fury. You've won this round," they said, "but this isn't over." Reese's hand didn't waver. "Next time, you won't get the chance," she said. Her team converged around her, securing the perimeter, ensuring no threats remained. Civilians, her Marine ally included, were safe, and the orchestrator's network was exposed, dismantled, and under control. The Marine finally approached, all written across his face. I've never seen anything like that. Reese allowed herself a faint smile, the first in hours. Learn from it, she said. Patience, precision, control. That's how battles are won, silently, decisively, and without hesitation. Outside, the night returned to its quiet rhythm. Miami's streets glimmered under the moonlight, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. Reese surveyed the scene, every sense still alert. Threats could return, shadows could linger, but she was always prepared, always ahead, always in control. The Marine whispered almost reverently, You really are America's most dangerous SEAL commander." Reese nodded slightly. "Danger isn't in the title," she said softly. "It's in the skill, the control, and the choices you make." The orchestrator, now in custody, could only watch as she walked away, her team following silently, the balance of power restored. Miami had survived the night, unaware of how close it had come to disaster. Reese paused, looking back one last time. The city lights reflected in her eyes, a reminder that danger could appear anywhere, anytime, but she was ready, always. And with that, Reese, Viper, Callahan disappeared into the night, a shadow among shadows, lethal, precise, and in command of the battlefield. A living legend in a world that never truly understood the full extent of her power.